Welcome to Tresor Expansions. I'm Chloe Lula, the host of the show and a Tresor Club resident. With these interviews, we want to shed light on the artists closely affiliated with Tresor. Longtime legends who have released on the label across the decades, past and present regulars in the booth, and the up-and-comers who are just getting their foot in the door of the club. In each conversation, I have a guest reflect on their musical influences and the songs that shaped them, as well as their connection to the sound and ethos of the Berlin institution. This month's episode is with Alan Oldham, a Detroit native living in Berlin who made his claim to fame as an early member of underground resistance. The illustrator, DJ, and music producer started out on the radio, hosting a show called Fast Forward on the Detroit NPR affiliate WDET, where he showcased techno, industrial, Chicago house, and unreleased white labels from his friends in underground resistance. He went on to become an official member when he was asked to replace Jeff Mills, adopting the codename DJ T1000, as was customary for members of the outfit. It was only shortly thereafter that he released his debut on Tresor, showing his music to Dimitri Hegemon on one of his visits to Detroit. Oldham played at Tresor and then relocated to the German capital full-time, even when most of his Detroit contemporaries stayed behind. It was then that he became tightly affiliated with Ellen Allien and B-Pitch Control, and he started to tour widely around Europe. His comic art, which explores themes of Afrofuturism, science fiction, cultural awareness, and mythology, was also met with enormous success upon his relocation to Berlin. And he's been actively showing his work in galleries and creating artwork for labels like +8, Houndstooth, Djax, and a number of other imprints in the intervening years. I learned that Oldham was a member of the jury that bestowed Berlin with UNESCO Intangible Cultural Status for its legacy of electronic music and nightlife. And we talked about the judging process as well as the criticisms that were leveled against the decision-making body for ostensibly overlooking Detroit's role as the original home of techno. Oldham has been living the Detroit-Berlin connection his entire life. So he shared some fascinating insights about what divides and unites these two cities and how the relationship between its artists and musical institutions has changed. He's such an inspiration, and he's more active in his creative careers now than he ever has been. So without further ado, here is Tresor Expansions with the one and only Alan Oldham. Hi, Alan. It's great to speak with you today. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good.
Yeah. You just got back from a big U.S. tour.
I did.
How long were you there?
I was there for a month.
Okay,
Yeah.
Nice. How often do you get to go back?
I had 2 U.S. tours this year.
Okay.
So I go back fairly often now. It went from nothing. Now I'm there twice a year.
How does it feel to go back when because you've been based in Berlin for more than 10 years now?
I have.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. This is year 10.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Does it feel like you're going home when you go back to the U.S.?
Well, yeah, because I'm based in Detroit in between gigs.
Yes.
So it's definitely going back to my hometown. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the premise of this show is to explore the musical roots and influences of artists close to Tresor. And I ask each guest to choose a selection of songs that have paved their path, but that also narrate their connection to the club. And your tracks, not too unsurprisingly, look a lot at the Berlin-Detroit connection. So I wanted to start with the first track you chose. It Is What It Is by Rhythm is Rhythm, which came out on Transmat in 1988. It is a moniker of Derek Mays, who is a little bit of a taboo subject in our industry these days, but still has had a lasting impact on our scene. What can you tell us about this track?
This is one of the very first tracks that got me into techno. Before this, I did not realize that Detroit guys my own age were the ones making this music. Like if you would watch the New Dance Show, these kind of, local shows or local radio even, you'd hear this music, but it was later did I realize that these are actual people I knew that were making this music. It's kind of a romantic track for me because It reminds me of the old days of the Music Institute, and I played it a lot on my radio show because I had a radio show back in Detroit called Fast Forward on
Yes.
WDET, and it was a staple of my show at that time. Nowadays, as a producer, and a lot of producers just kind of make tracks, like jack tracks or DJ tools or something like that. But this track, it had the pads and the sounds, and it had a romantic feeling that a lot of today's music kind of doesn't have. The track being the vintage that it is, you have a lot of memories that are tied up with it. A lot of new stuff has not been out long enough to have like emotional connections to it yet.
Yeah.
I go into my promo email account, and it's like a lot of really good new tracks like every week, but they haven't marinated. They're not part of your life yet. That's kind of one of the downfalls of the death of physical. The next new wave of new tracks that come out like a week later, and it's kind of forgotten.
Yeah, totally.
This thing has kind of marinated for 30 years in my life. I realize this gentleman is, like you said, he's taboo, but he's part of my history.
Totally.
He's a key part of my story. So as the title of the track says, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
So, see, this is how we go completely full circle. Boom. There you go.
Yeah. About Detroit during this time. My understanding is that you were studying art. And as you mentioned, you had a show called Fast Forward. You were playing a lot of music, electronic music, that was important in Detroit's musical history. Tell me a little bit about this show.
A slight correction. I was studying radio, TV, film.
Okay.
At Wayne State.
Okay.
Art was secondary. I was self-taught. Comic book fan. That was one of my goals, was to be a professional comic book artist, But radio, TV, film was my real career. I'm doing air quotes for those of you who can't see. But I was doing art at that time. I was doing indie comics, doing anything in between my college career, As part of radio, TV, film, I was involved with the student radio station at Wayne State University called WAYN, which still exists, and you can hear it on the internet now. Back when I was there, it was a low-power AM radio station that could only be heard basically in the Cass Corridor, Wayne State area. That is where I had the opportunity to record what is called air checks. And air checks is basically a demo tape of your show and your voice and all that. In order to graduate, I had to do an internship, and I ended up marching into WDET to see if they needed any help.
And this is the Detroit branch of NPR, right?
It is.
Okay.
It is. Very unique amongst NPR affiliates because 101.9 FM was the middle of the dial, which was prime real estate in the radio times. Usually your public radio station is like way up, like 88, 89. But this is 101.9. The big rock station was right next door to us on the dial, you know. So anyway, I marched in there, and my internship was alphabetizing the music library.
Classic
Right?
internship.
So I marched in there, and that was the job for me. So I would come in every day and just go from A to Z, because the hosts wouldn't put the records in right after their show. They just put them in any old place. So I did that. I did that for the summer, and it got to be September, and the program director, Judy Adams, who just recently passed away, she asked me if I had any demo tapes or air checks. And I said, I sure did, and I went in my backpack and gave it to her because I had it. And it turned out that the overnight man was getting fired, and they needed somebody to take on 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And this is in 1987. So basically I got the gig, and they put me on graveyard shift. That's how my radio career really got started.
You know, I've interviewed Juan Atkins, Rod Medell, people who grew up in Detroit around this time and were so influenced by radio and like the electrifying mojo. Obviously, yeah, I mean, just like a testament to how powerful radio was in like getting a lot of progenitors of techno really into electronic music.
Yeah, in our generation, it was all about radio. It really was. It was way more than mojo at that time, because this is the time like early new wave. So many different permutations of music were coming out. When I got my show in 1987, it was kind of the confluence of the Summer of Love in the UK, electronic body music / industrial, Chicago house, Detroit techno, and conscious rap and hip hop, you know, AKA, you know, Public Enemy, and just a creative time. And I had a free form show, and I could just play whatever I wanted.
Do you have any of those archived anywhere?
I do. Actually.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know the URL like right off the top of my head, but just Google Alan Oldham fast forward program.
Okay.
And it should pop up.
I'm going to look for that after.
I managed to record a few of them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Nice. I know that Underground Resistance would send you reel-to-reels and unreleased music that you would play on the show as well.
I helped to break those guys.
Okay. Well, so on that note, let's listen to the second track you picked, Final Frontier, which is an Underground Resistance classic. Tell us why you chose this one.
To me, the Final Frontier, that really encapsulates what UR was about at that time. Elevation, looking to space. A lot of that was Mike Banks, you know. That was the edge of UR, was that Mike Banks was a real musician. And he was able to infuse these tracks with so much soul. Like everybody else was programmers, you know. But this guy was actually with the chords and the progressions and the melodies.
Did he have a background in was he classically trained, or I actually don't know?
He played in church.
Okay.
Little known fact that people don't know. Mike Banks used to be in a band called The Mechanics, and they were a black new wave band. This is early 80s.
Okay.
And there used to be a club called Trax on Gratiot in Detroit. It was a rock and roll club. I used to sneak in there to see bands, and I saw Banks when he was in The Mechanics years ago.
Wow.
And this is before I even met him. obviously I ended up meeting him and working with him later on in life. But yeah, he was in a rock band. It was several other guys in the band. I think Amp Fiddler was in the band.
Oh, no way.
You know, this is the 80s. Yeah.
This is kind of a tangent, but do you know there's a documentary called A Band Called Death?
Yes,
Yes.
I've seen it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So good. And the music,
Detroit,
amazing.
Detroit, all once again at the vanguard, because Death was from Detroit.
Yeah. Punk bands. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you ended up working in the UR office as their quote unquote minister of information. What did that role entail?
Basically, I was the Professor Griff of UR. Professor Griff was Public Enemy's Minister of Information.
Okay.
And he was the guy that would stand there behind a podium and he'd kind of push the Public Enemy message. And I was the equivalent for UR. I mean, I had this communications and radio background. And Jeff is the one that actually brought me in.
Okay.
Yeah.
The story that I've read online is that your first connection was really with Mike when he approached you at Wayne State and asked you to start drawing for him.
No.
Oh, no. Okay.
Another correction to the lore.
Okay.
It was actually Derek May.
Okay.
Who he used to work near my campus, and he would cut through the student center to get to his job. He saw me hanging out at the student center one day drawing. And I've known Derek since we were like 10 years old. But he saw me drawing and he's like, hey, man, I'm starting this new label. You know, can you do this label art for me? Blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he paid me and everything and I did it. And that was 87, you know, and that was, you know, nude photo. And, you know, that's how my art career in records kind of got started. But in terms of UR, I was friends with Jeff since high school. There used to be a mall called Northland, and we both worked there. And like we worked across the hall from each other. You know, I kept tabs on him, and then later on, you know, he started UR, and he plucked me out of a bad job that I had at that time. And he says, come on over with us. You could do press releases, blah, blah, blah. This is what your degree is in, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I started working with UR. And then that's when I got cool with Mike.
Okay.
But it was through Jeff Mills.
Yes,
you know? Yeah.
Jeff Mills.
Right.
Can you paint a picture of what the experience was like being in the UR office? Like, what were the conversations that you all were having? What was the ethos at the headquarters? And I guess more importantly, how did it change your view on techno art?
When I started at UR, we were in Mike Banks's mom's basement.
Okay.
It wasn't even a proper office. And we were all huddled in there. And Mike's mom was a teacher. So somehow all these like school desks ended up in her basement. So we're like grown men at school desks doing our work. It was myself and Mike, Jeff, and Rob Hood. Rob used to do art and paste ups. And, you know, Rob can draw. A lot of people don't know that Robert Hood can actually draw.
Hmm.
But he used to do art and paste ups, a lot of the promo posters, a lot of the stuff that was on display at Tresor last year.
Okay.
A lot of those archives were kind of pasted up by Rob. This is before the Mac, and you were still doing paste ups and stuff like that. We talk about music, and the main ethos of UR at the time was basically DIY. Don't sign away your music. Don't sign to majors. Do it yourself. You don't need their machine to get famous or to get your music out there. And that's always been the kind of driving force. Because both Jeff and Mike had been screwed by record labels in Detroit. Part of the thing of UR was, you know, independence.
Mm.
You know, total independence. One of the genius things about underground resistance is that the concept is amorphous. So that means it can mean whatever you want it to mean. It can be adapted to anything. And that's basically you are. But when I was there, that was kind of the main focus, is to, local musicians and artists to empower themselves, do their own thing. Don't sign away your rights. Don't sign away your music, your art, thinking you're going to be bigger when you could just put it out yourself. It's more work, but it's yours. And that's the main thing I got out of my time at UR.
I know that Afrofuturism was, of course, a really big part of the techno movement in Detroit. And I know it played an equally important role in your comic art, which we haven't really talked about yet. But what kind of art were you making at this time? I'm thinking of characters you're known for, like Vectra, Black Girl from the future.
Yeah. Well, at that time, I had done a comic called Johnny Gambit, and which actually got out there. There was a thing in comics called the black and white boom, or the black and white revolution, where guys were putting out their own comics, and you were not waiting for Marvel and DC, and you were putting out your own stuff. And at that time, it was pretty cheap to do comics, to actually make them. And the distribution was strong enough that you could actually get paid, So I did 3 issues of Johnny. A couple of publishers, friends of mine, put it out. But then techno came along, and I stopped drawing for a long time. Johnny was kind of the kitchen sink of everything I liked at the time, like anime, manga, Miami Vice. There was a comic called Mr. X at that time that I really loved. There was another comic called Grendel that I really liked. And basically it was everything I liked in one comic. And then later on, I came up with Vectra, because I had this lull in my DJ career at that time. And I came up with Vectra, Black Girl from the Future. It was supposed to look like I was on drugs when I did it, but I wasn't. It was like psychedelic.
Cool.
Psychedelic sci-fi, little Afrofuturism in there. Black female protagonist with superpowers. Yeah. The actual term Afrofuturism didn't come in till later. I started working with Abdul Haq, and he's the guy who did the Drexia graphic novels.
Okay.
He created the visual identity for Drexia.
Is he from Detroit?
He's also from Detroit. He worked at Transmat right after I did.
Okay.
The next wave of labels was him. I was the first guy, and then he came in. And that's when I met him at Transmat, like 30 years ago. And I worked with him on the second volume of Drexia, which Tresor released. To me, his artwork is more along the lines of pure Afrofuturism. I'm a pop artist. He's really Afrofuturistic. Yeah. But when I started work with him, then, you could see the Afrofuturism in his work. I just kind of downplay my own kind of Afrofuturism. I'm just a pop artist, really, in terms of my comic book stuff. Yeah.
When you officially joined UR, you replaced Jeff Mills, who was leaving. And this is how your moniker DJ T1000 was born, which I know it's also a reference to a sci-fi movie.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, Jeff ended up leaving. He got a residency at the Limelight in New York. And Mike called and asked me if I could go on tour with them. They had 3 dates in Australia, and Jeff left, and we need a DJ. Can you do it? And at the time, I was still working at WDT, and I was working at a comic book shop, Comics Cafe, Todd Johnson. Basically, he pulled me away from all that. And now you work for me. My name is Charlie. So, boomer reference. So I ended up going on the road with Banks and Rob and Derwin Hall. And, we went to Australia, and we were on the flight over. And Mike is like, everybody in UR has to have a code name. So what is your code name? Come up with one. And I came up with T1000, which was the reference from the movie Terminator 2.
Okay.
T1000 was the shape-shifting liquid metal cyborg enemy of the Schwarzenegger character. And the whole concept behind him is that he could assume any shape. He could look like anyone and sound like anyone. He was unstoppable until he reached his objective. So I identify with that at that time. So I took the name DJ T1000 because of that.
Sick. So I usually move more or less in chronological order with music when I do these interviews, but I actually wanted to break the rules and jump to your next track, which is yours, Progress. And it came out on an album you released for Tresor in 2000. So how did your artistry and your relationship to techno and DJing evolve between you joining UR and you putting out this record?
At this time, Mike Banks had started Submerge. And the whole thing with Submerge was it was doing P&D for multiple, pressing and distribution, for those who don't know, for multiple Detroit labels. So I got to watch Mike in the studio a lot. And I was also working with somebody making original tracks. I had an old studio partner that let me come in and make music at his place. So, I was learning fairly quickly, and watching what Mike was doing and watching what my studio partner was doing. And basically, I had built up my own studio by this time. And I was steady working on tracks, and I had the Generator label going through Submerge, and then I'd started Pure Sonic, which was just my own solo productions. So I was living in Palmer Park. I had my studio there. And Mike calls me again. He's like, "Hey, Al, I got these guys from Berlin, and they're in town. They're doing a book, and they want to interview, some guys, and they're from Tresor. And I'm like, wow, that's a big label. And I told Mike, I says, okay, well, they can come over and we can talk, but they have to listen to my demo.
So you were fully aware of Tresor at this point?
At that time, yeah. Because, because Tresor did X101.
Mm-hmm.
And Fish Labor, the precursor label to Tresor, did the Final Cut album with Jeff Mills.
Such a good album.
So, or Interfish. So I knew completely about Dimitri and Tresor because I was at UR when they were working X101 and X102 The Vision. So I was completely aware of Tresor. So now all of a sudden they want to come to my house. So I said, well, if they listen to my demo, they can come over. And Mike is like, okay. So Max and Corolla come to my house. Yeah. We talked and stuff, and they had a photographer. I can't remember his name, but they had a photographer with them also. And so they come over my house, as promised, they listen to, hey, what are you working on right now? And I played them this stuff, and those tracks went on to be Jet Set Love Life. And that was in 97.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when they started bringing me over to play.
Okay.
And we were playing like this was at the old Leipzigerstrasse Tresor.
Original, yeah.
Right. Then Corolla's like, okay, we need an album.
Nice.
And that's how Progress came to be.
I actually hadn't listened to the album. It's really like fast, functional, rhythmic tracks. But then this closing track called Tonight it's more down tempo. It's really cool.
Thank you.
And there's a track on there called Berlin. So I guess at that time you'd played Tresor a couple times. I mean, what were your impressions coming from Detroit to Berlin? Like, how is it different? Like, how did it capture you?
Well, first of all, when I played Tresor, I'd never seen crowds like that. Techno had not really taken hold back home the way it did over here. So I was shocked at the crowd response. I really liked that. The track Berlin came about I had an extra day and I was just kind of walking the streets at night. It was just different from Detroit. My mind wasn't blown or anything. It was just a different place. But just the mood and the atmosphere was different. And they had us at a hotel. It's still there, but it's like right down the street from the original Tresor on Leipziger Straße. Hotel Corbat. That's the name of it. If you guys want to look it up, that's what it's called. It's closed now, but yeah. But I'm just walking the streets at night. And it was kind of rainy, kind of film noir-ish. And that was the inspiration for the track Berlin.
So you obviously decided to move to Berlin. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of your contemporaries in the Detroit techno scene stayed in Detroit. And you decided to move here. Why was it that you made the leap and have stayed? Like, are there opportunities here that you feel that you didn't have there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's why, I moved here because I was chasing the gigs. Nothing was going on for me in the States at that time. I was living in Chicago at that time. I moved out of Detroit. It was pretty much dead. And then I got the opportunity to move here full time. And I took it. I think a lot of guys back in Detroit never left because, they had families. A lot of guys had kids, young kids. They couldn't just up and leave. They had wives. I was engaged at the time, but, I didn't have a full-on house and kids and stuff like that. And, choices needed to be made. Mm-hmm. So I ended up here. And then when I ended up in Berlin, then that's where my career took off. I mean, literally, I got here, I ran into Ellen in the street. Next thing you know, I'm on tour with her. Wow. That's basically how that went.
Wow, crazy. Yeah. And it wasn't just your music career. I mean, it seems like the reception for your art also really took off once you moved to Europe.
Correct.
Why do you think it resonated so much more here?
Well, Europe in general, Berlin in particular, they really respect artists, especially here in Germany, visual artists. A lot of, filmmakers, painters. My visual side was accepted just almost along with my musical side or more. It kind of set me apart from other DJ producers that I could actually draw and paint and, make cartoons and stuff like that.
And you have done a lot of artwork for a bunch of labels at this point, right?
I have.
So like Houndstooth, Djax, +8.
+8. I did a comic for +8.
I don't know.
Years back. Richie and John. God, who else? Detuned. I did some stuff for Mord. I did the album cover for The Advent. Yeah, I've done a lot of label art for different people. Yeah.
Let's play your next track, Red Planet by Star Dancer, which came out in 1992. And you're not the first person to choose this song on this show. So it obviously resonates with a lot of artists closely affiliated with Tresor for some reason. Why do you think that is? And what has stuck with you with the song?
Well, Star Dancer was the Detroit answer to early trance, early European trance. A lot of stuff on Hard House at the time. It resonates with me because it's sci-fi. It's one of the few classic Detroit tracks that you can play fast. A lot of stuff doesn't pitch up really that well, but that, it's got great DJ breakdowns in it, so you can come in with the next track. It's Detroit science fiction techno. And like I said, it's the Detroit version of the big trance tracks of the early 90s.
A large part of Tresor's identity is its commitment to showcasing the Berlin-Detroit connection. Do you feel like that connection manifests itself in the club's musical DNA and in the club's current incarnation? And I guess kind of a corollary question is, do you feel like there's enough of an understanding of Detroit techno culture in Europe at this time?
Unlike many people, I think there is. People know about Detroit techno. They know who made it. You see a lot of kind of online discourse, if not outright flame wars over who started techno. But, if you're not chronically online in real life, people know where this stuff started and who did it. I mean, they do. It's been like kind of 30 years nonstop education. It's kind of undeniable at this point that Detroit artists are, kind of key in the development of Tresor. That's down to Dimitri completely, and that is what sets Tresor apart from other Berlin clubs.
Totally.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I ask this is because of the criticism that's been raised against, like, for example, Berlin was selected as a place with UNESCO intangible cultural status because of its techno scene. A lot of people think that invalidates Detroit as like the originator of techno. There have been similar concerns raised with Frankfurt's Museum of Electronic Music. So I'm just curious to get your take on that, as maybe the only person I know and have interviewed for the show who's from Detroit, but actually lives in Europe and has been based here for a while.
Mm-hmm. I worked on that UNESCO campaign.
Interesting.
I was brought in by Dr. Mata's team. Dr. Mata, for those who don't know, a legendary Berlin DJ, kind of a pioneer. He was the co-founder of the original Love Parade in the 90s, which is now brought back as Rave the Planet, and he's the spearhead of that. One of his projects during the pandemic was to campaign for intangible heritage status for Berlin techno, kind of the amorphous Berlin techno, which is kind of an umbrella term for clubs and that music. The original concern was to somehow historically protect clubs as cultural landmarks, as places where art springs from, fashion, filmmaking, painting. This kind of all springs from club kids and club life. The concept then was that during the pandemic, a lot of these places were in danger of closing. They could not open. They couldn't make money. And the club workers, of course, were out of work. So at that time, the idea was to try to protect these spaces from gentrification and speculators and that sort of thing. What people don't realize is that the intangible heritage status has to be applied for and pitched. It is close to how cities have to pitch for the World Cup, or the Super Bowl. They have to actually go in with a campaign and convince, these entities, hey, my city is the place for this. And the UNESCO heritage status was the same. You had to pitch for it. And nobody in Detroit pitched for it.
Yeah.
That's all. And politically at the time, I think we had, in America, this is fuzzy to me, but during the first Trump administration, he had basically cut ties with that part of the UN that governed UNESCO. So it wasn't until recently that America is kind of back with UNESCO and you can apply again. Because there was one point where you couldn't apply at all. Somehow Detroit got a UNESCO recognition as a design city.
Yeah, there is that design museum there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they were able to get that, but I think a lot of this was kind of knee-jerk internet reaction. Guys really didn't know the whole story or the politics behind it. So no, I don't think that Detroit got shafted. In fact, I was doing press for the UNESCO initiative, and people did ask about Detroit. And I felt that our city is known for so much more than techno. If it wasn't for the urban problems of Detroit, we would be like Nashville. Like Nashville is known as Music City. But if it wasn't for race, and if it wasn't for the 67 riots, if it wasn't for this, Rust Belt, the whole narrative of Detroit, all the crime, all the plants closed. And see, if it wasn't for this narrative about Detroit, we would be Music City as well.
Yeah.
This is what I'm saying. From Motown to jazz to hip hop, Jay Dilla, soul music of the 70s, all the way up to techno, all the way up to house today. Even before Motown, you had guys in the 40s, jazz dudes. There's such a long and rich musical history in my hometown. And hopefully a group will get together and pitch UNESCO on that basis.
Yeah.
But Dr. Mata did it for Berlin first, but in my opinion, it was not a slight. Obviously Mata's from here. He was born in Berlin. This is his town. He's looking out for it. So hopefully someone back home will do the same.
Yeah. Really interesting perspective. I had no idea you were part of that project.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Let's play your next track, Didgeridoo by Aphex Twin. It came out on RNS in 1992. Apparently in an interview, he said, I wanted to have some tracks to play to finish the raves I used to play, to really kill everybody off so they couldn't dance. Didgeridoo came out of that. Why did you select this track?
When I first started playing out, not as a radio personality, but actually mixing, playing a show, that was part of my crate. Because I was really playing like harder techno even back then. And that was like just part of my set. And in fact, the very first gig I did under my own name, the very first rave I played that track.
I was listening to an interview you gave in 2012, and you said you thought techno had come full circle at that time. You said, it's come back to just being about creativity and trying new things. So now, 13 years later, does that sentiment still hold true for you about like the nature of techno?
Well, it still does actually, because you can't make money on this anymore. So there's no barrier to creativity. There's nobody telling you to make a hit. There's no record company telling you, well, you got to make a hit. It's got to sound like this. People can do what they want. You put it up on your Bandcamp, or, put it on Beatport or whatever. And it is all about art for me.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I pay attention to my own zone in terms of music. But from my perspective, you don't see a lot of people chasing hits. You see people doing what they feel, doing what they want, And so I guess when I said that in 2012, that was the beginning of the kind of collapse of the selling of music And now here we are years later. And yeah, I just see people doing what they like and what they want.
It's refreshing, actually, to hear somebody say that.
Well, like I said, I kind of pay attention to my own zone.
Yeah.
I don't really pay attention to the broader music world right now. But in my own myopic vision, in the people I know and the promos I get and the DJs I hear out, they're doing what they feel. They're pushing their own personal limits.
Yeah.
Which helps the scene.
Totally.
You know, I was hanging out with some friends last night and they played me some stuff. And this was the first like hit track that I've heard like in a long time. Like they could actually be on the BBC One, you know, like had this potential to be big. And I have not heard a track like that like in years. This thing could have come out like in 1994 and it would have been just like huge back then. But I don't hear too many people kind of aiming towards hits. You know, people are making really good tracks. You can DJ them and people like that. Yeah. So I don't know.
You've been in the game for a long time now.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
But, you know, listening back to your releases like Progress, it seems to me like your style has been relatively consistent. How would you say that your approach to DJing and music making has changed?
Well, the tools have changed because now I do everything on laptop. When I was back in the States, I had a whole studio back home, you know, all the boxes. But the tools have changed, but my approach to making tracks really hasn't. In fact, I have to shake myself out of it and say, okay, we're going to go this way this time and make, you know, use these sounds just to make it be, you know, give it some variety and come in from left field. Kind of like what you pointed out earlier, how I made this down-tempo track on my album. Because I was always a big fan of trip hop and down tempo. So sometimes I like to come in on that angle, not just banging techno. And it's a lot of sounds you can use in trip hop or down tempo that you really can't use in, you know, high BPM techno. It's like two different things. But I think my approach is pretty much the same. You know, only the tools have changed. I didn't think Progress was even that good. I at that time I didn't have the confidence, and I stumbled onto those tracks. I'm like, oh, that's cool, but I didn't really have big confidence back then. I had to get out of not Detroit, but I had to get out of the States to get confidence. You know.
Well, I'd love to talk about what you're doing right now. I mean, what have you been working on musically, but also with your art? Because you've always been an active artist.
Well, funny you should ask because I have a project coming out, which is it's a graphic novel and a double vinyl like box set.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And it's an original graphic novel that I started it during the pandemic. And I did the album also during the pandemic. And it's yet to come out because the label is working with this Chinese printer to actually make the 12 by 12 artwork. Because it's going to be a comic with records in it. And it's going to be 12 by 12.
Have you done something like this before?
I did some stuff like this for Saskia, for Djax-Up.
Okay.
But this is the modern iteration. The book is in color. It is a sequel to the +8 019 comic I did for Houghton and Aquaviva back in the day. Uh-huh. It's a loose sequel for that. And it's in color and yeah, it's pretty wild. UR is in it. A bunch of other people, like, they don't know they're in it yet, but they will when it comes out. Yeah, so I was working on that. And then I'm working on it's a trip hop, dub techno, electro punk album.
That sounds amazing.
Under the name The Black Warhols.
Okay.
And that should be coming out this year.
Nice.
I did an EP and then an album will follow. Okay. And the album will be on vinyl. It will be an old school LP, meaning it's 4 tracks on each side, like a old time album. It'll be coming out on a label called Aufnahme und Wiedergabe.
I'm very familiar.
Yeah, Philip Strobel. I'm happy to be on this label because this is my end to the kind of underground industrial scene.
Yeah.
You know, I've been hanging out with guys like Chris Baha and
Friend of mine.
yeah, and Philip and a bunch of these guys. Phase Fatale. So this is kind of my contribution to that.
Nice.
So yeah, but that has yet to come out, and right now I'm working on art. I haven't worked on tracks in a while, but I've got some art projects that I'm trying to finish now.
You've been painting as well.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. I've been painting. I'm trying to get a show here in Berlin, maybe in the spring.
Okay.
So I've been furiously making new stuff for that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, do you generally do music and art in equal measure, or does your attention shift between one and the
I go back
other?
and forth.
Okay.
I've tried to do both at the same time. You have to really focus on either or, the way my process works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Let's move to the closing track. It's my favorite song, actually, of the ones that you chose. It is the aqua mix of a song called Mobility by Moby. Came out in 1996. It's from an album called Rare, the collected B-sides. Pretty sick down-tempo. Speaking of down-tempo, tell me about this one and how it played a role in your creative development.
Well, this is another Fast Forward classic that I used to play on my show a lot. This was back when Moby made underground techno. There was an era at the very beginning where a lot of his stuff was indistinguishable from a Detroit artist. Like if you did not know who he was, you'd be like, who is this guy? He sounds like, sounds like You Are, or it sounds like, the Bonds brothers, from Detroit, Brian Bonds and those guys. And I gravitated to it because of the pads. It was made back in the day when people would make kind of radio mixes of their tracks, because this thing was only like 4 minutes long. It's not even long. Like now you make tracks and they're long, so you can DJ them. Mm-hmm. But this was more of a kind of afterthought for him. This is before he really went big.
Yeah.
This is one of the Instinct tracks, which to me was his best stuff, like the stuff on Instinct. There's an album called Instinct Dance that people should check out. And it's Moby under all different names. It's double vinyl, but it's him under all different names. So it seems like multiple artists. And his stuff was really raw back in those days. Now he makes actual music, obviously, for movies and radio and TV and stuff like that. But back then he was really underground. And I saw him play. It was Moby, Aphex Twin, Cybersonic tour. This is the early 90s. I emceed for Cybersonic. Like back in those days, you had like the electronic rave bands, and they had, a couple of them had black MCs. Okay. So Richie asked me and there's this Richie Hawtin documentary, and it's on YouTube, and you can see me on there.
Okay, everyone go check it out.
Performing with Cybersonic. Well, anyway, I was watching Moby, and this is the first cat I saw that was doing like punk rock moves behind a keyboard. And at that time, they were kind of miming. Well, Cybersonic was not, but Moby was. Moby was playing off a DAT. But he was kind of like doing these like, punk rock guitar moves. And I was perplexed, but I liked it. And it just added to the dynamic of it. So yeah, Moby was an influence in my early career. I used to play him a lot on my show. Used to chart him. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's been really nice talking to you. Thank you so much for doing this interview.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another installment of Tresor Expansions. In this episode, you heard It Is What It Is by Rhythm is Rhythm, The Final Frontier by Underground Resistance, Didgeridoo by Aphex Twin, Star Dancer by The Martian, The Aqua Mix of Mobility by Moby, and Progress by DJ T1000, also known as Alan Oldham. If you liked what you heard, please check out the previous interviews in the series with Silent Servant, Helena Hoff, Rode Medell, and Lady Starlight. You can find them on the Refuge Worldwide website, as well as by searching for Tresor Expansions on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to audio. We'll be back again in 2 months. See you next time.